Wonderful, Nick. Thank you very much for coming. Can we maybe start with a quick intro on what you do?
So I look after the valuation group at CBRE for UK and Ireland. And I suppose I have another hat where you and I work together on the RICS professional group panel for valuation, where I'm currently chair.
Yeah, which is really interesting because we talk about where's the future valuation. And of course, my personal interest is how will data and AI influence valuation in the future. And we have this interesting conundrum where we have a fairly regulated process. We need clear evidence to show how valuations arrived at, what the comparable data is. And now increasingly we have sort of AVMs and data and AI that is starting to compete with these sorts of valuations. And within the RICS and within the sector as a whole, I think there's a greater discussion as to how will data influence valuers, how we're going to deal with it in the future. We can't stay as we are. We have to evolve. Mm-hmm. We have to embrace new technologies. How do we do so while retaining trust in profession and remaining professionally liable, I think, and not handing over liability to an AI or an AVM model? And so I'd be interested in your thoughts around that.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there, Chris. I mean, first thing is that no doubt valuation is a data-driven business. Yeah. So we spend a huge amount of our time, as you well know, analysing market data, and really that's at the core of it, because a robust valuation regime that inspires confidence in the market participants is actually, is a reason why we have a thriving market. So that whole piece about diligence in analysis and being able to explain what we do is fundamental. AI is giving us some new tools, and certainly the way that I think about it as a practicing valuer is these are tools that I can use to make my life easier. They're not tools to replace me. I'm a very big believer in you shouldn't fear the technology itself. Yeah. You should fear somebody using the technology better than you. Yeah. Whichever way we use AI or we use technology, it needs to be transparent. Yeah. Black boxes don't cut it. Valuation is about providing advice and having evidence and a rationale and a logic to back up that conclusion.
Yeah, I think the challenge is the black box model are more accurate because they look at enormous amounts of data. They look at things like neural network that builds coefficient factors and things like this between every transaction for the past 30 years and so on, but they sacrifice explainability. Mm-hmm. And if you have a fairly standard-of-the-mill residential property in a liquid market, an AVM might actually be more accurate than a valuer who walks the beat and understands there's 3 comparables from 6 months ago. They're not exactly the same. The adjustments are based on experience rather than judgment. And I also find a lot of valuers are quite lazy. I wonder at what stage will there be a switch saying, actually, the model just does it better?
It's undoubtedly the case that in liquid markets where there's an abundance of transactional evidence, valuation is easier. In a sense, valuers come into their own in more difficult markets where you need the benefit of that experience, where you need to understand the particular nature of the buyers and sellers who are active at that particular time to be able to make those judgments. Now, I think we've all seen, it's interesting we're talking about AI, and AI is obviously, the big talking point in society in general at the moment. But actually, AVMs and the use of machine learning has been around in real estate, predominantly in residential real estate, for some time. And whilst it has got some uses, we haven't seen it completely usurp the place of the experienced valuer. And I think that's key.
Yeah, and I think there's an element where people assume a valuer just gives an opinion of value. Mm-hmm. So you have a pound figure and that's it. Yeah. Whereas actually valuers will give you advice on how to enhance the value, what to do with it. They might also highlight risks to the value, which an AI will struggle to do, I think, to a great degree. So I think there will always be a human element, particularly in commercial real estate. Mm-hmm. Resi is easier, there's more transactions, they're more uniform in where they are. But what about the regulation? So you work very closely with the RICS. Yeah. We follow the Red Book.
Yes.
Do you see that evolving?
Yes, look, I think again, certainly part of my role as chair of the PGP and you're a very active member is to give guidance to our constituents, to our members. So it absolutely we will have to, and we do. We look at providing guidance to our members of how to interact with some of these new technologies. How to its limitations and its advantages. And I think it's this whole point of viewing as a tool, and in most cases a tool that makes our lives easier, and an enhancing tool, and hopefully drives accuracy rather than something that can be shunned and ignored.
Yeah, but there's a risk, of course, because most valuers are older. They have fairly set ways of working, and I think there's a risk we're not attracting the bright young surveyors who would bring in that desire, the curiosity of saying, how do I better use data? What do I do with it?
Yeah, and Chris, I think this is, with my CBRE hat on, we have a big team. We spend a lot of time trying to attract the right talent and really, and make it as an attractive place to work as possible. And undoubtedly, data and analytics and using good technology and deriving insight from the combination of data sets and viewing real estate within the wider context is something that is demanded by the graduates of today. They really they want to understand, they want to be working in a modern environment. So I think, again, just to for the relevance of the profession and to attract the right talent, we absolutely have got to embrace these things. And there are some, you can generalize that prop tech has lagged behind fintech, but I think there is a general awareness that we need to engage, we need to understand, and it's an enabler.
Do you find there's big data gaps?
I think it's interesting as to which markets you're looking at. So we know, if you look at the real estate investment markets in general around the world, there's some are more transparent than others, and we're very fortunate in the UK that we generally have a good tradition of sharing of data and the transparency of data. But actually, I think what sits behind your question is, if you look at the amount of open source data that is now available very available in 2024, even compared to when I started in the early 90s, it's enormous. So the ability to actually drill down and examine whether it's demographics, whether it's transport, whether it's shopper patterns, whether it's consumer behavior, whether it's whatever it is enables us to build a more sophisticated picture now. And I think we ignore that at our peril. I mean, absolutely needs to be taken into account.
With your CBRE advisory hat on, how much do you actually use AI to sort of drive these insights for your clients, and how much do your clients require better insights, and how much is demanded from you?
Yeah, so look, I think you touched on it earlier. Valuation isn't just about providing a number. Yeah. We provide investment advice, and nobody buys a property based on its price on that day. It's all about its performance and how it's going to perform, and the potential to drive returns and increase returns. So increasingly, and it's almost week in, week out, there's, within the client space, there's more hunger for insight, there's more hunger for analysis, there's more hunger for benchmarking. We have 300 valuers in the UK. We spend a lot of time making sure that we're curating our market data, making sure that we're properly segmenting our valuation data. We're doing a lot of internal benchmarking. We're looking back in time.
Do you do any predictions?
At the moment, we're not using any machine-based forecasting. But there's an awful lot of sensitivity and looking forward, from a property risk analysis perspective. And I think that's absolutely expected of valuers. You only have to look at Peter Pereira Gray's review. The whole section on that was on the look forward property risk analysis. The focus at the moment is about help with with the gathering and recording of data and the availability of data.
Yeah.
So we use it for lease extraction, we use it for scanning documents. I'm very open to, the data journey moving from, descriptive analytics, but ending up with predictive analytics, and that doesn't. But there's the important thing to emphasise here is that there's a questioning of it. The whole, there's a professional skepticism, if you know what I mean, that flows through the whole thing. A return to this black box type of thing. Anything that AI is helping us drive insight, we need to analyse that. We need to be absolutely comfortable with that insight before we take it as read.
Yeah, there's a couple of use cases I want to talk to you about. The first one, because you just reminded me, we recently built a ChatGPT Enterprise sandbox environment for a London REIT. We put in 30 years of their leases, all of their historical commercial real estate leases, and we did that in 2 weeks, including testing. Cost sub 50 grand to do. And the execs now have a chatbot and they can interrogate all their leases. How many dentists are renting from me? What's their square footage? How many leases are coming to expiration in the next 2 months? What's my pounds per square foot rate for dentists versus clinicians? You can ask so many questions from it, and it's so easy to do. And now the execs have this fun chat box that they can interrogate, and it goes beyond the dashboard because they can come up with whatever graph they want to come up with, which I think is really, really interesting. And it's highly accurate because it's trained on those leases and only on those leases. It can't answer any questions outside of that. And I really like this because it's a very quick, simple application of AI that's easy to explain, which has a demonstrable benefit to the execs on day one, because the ways of working have changed. The other one I wanted to talk to you about actually is we worked a few years ago for a very large London REIT, retail and office. And new CEO came into place and he was a change agent. And so he gave us a call in his first week of being in the job. And he said, I want to see what AI can do for us. He said, one of my frustrations is that we work with the big surveyor firms like CBRE, including CBRE. And every quarter they send me a big spreadsheet that tells me, here are 7 submarkets. Here's what we think the prediction will be for them. Typically it's 1% or 1.5%. It gives me no granularity. It's historical looking mostly. And I can't interrogate data, I can't do much with it. He says, can you build me a tool, an interactive tool, where you can predict the market for our submarkets, not CBREs, and can you make it more accurate than CBRE in predicting future market movements for those submarkets? And we spent about 6 months building this. Extraordinarily complex model, lots of neural networks that talk to each other and so on. And we then very proudly came back to him and the board and we showed him some graphs saying these are the top 4 surveyor firms in London. This is what the predictions have been for the past 10 years. This is how the model being backtracked for the past 10 years performs against them. And in every case is more accurate. Great. At which point the CFO then pipes up and says, yeah, but the thing is being 0.5% more accurate doesn't really do anything for me because it doesn't change my decision making. Whether you tell me it's going to do 12% or 12.5%, actually makes very little difference. What they were interested in was the relative maturity of different markets, and was, do we divest, do we invest, do we maintain and invest, etc. And so then we had to go back to the drawing board and repurpose the models for those things, because we worked out, it's hardly too late, accuracy wasn't the most important thing for them, it was informing the decision making. And the lesson that we learn is actually spending enormous amounts of time beating CBRE at the prediction game actually has very little value to it, because everyone sort of agrees to the trend in the market. It's about, at a micro level, understanding, is this building likely to perform better than another one?
I think the first one, the lease abstraction tool, I think that's a very obvious and a really easy win, and I think that change in our profession is coming very fast. The type of tool that you've just described, enables you to cut down that sort of grunt preparation time, allowing you more time to add the value which the client really wants. I think your second example is fascinating too, because there is, as you say, you with the amount of data out there, one can create incredibly complex models, but the check back is always the human. You know, how does that feel? Is that what I'm picking up in real life? Should I be looking at it from a slightly different angle? You know, and I think that is such a very healthy way of evolving tools. So I think I think there's infinitely more that we can do with data to help us derive insight rather than to take over.
I find there's a number of disruptors coming through the market, which are very interesting. But I find so many low-hanging fruits. Property management, transparency of service charges, all those sorts of things. Across all sectors, I find areas that are ripe for disruption. And I continue to be surprised that they don't exist yet. And I wonder how much of it is because the market is dominated by a few big incumbents. That as long as none of them blink, everyone stuff stays the same and goes with the course. How do you see that trend? How do you see?
Yeah, I mean, sitting within a global business and a large business, I think the good news is we're aware, and we spend a lot of time talking about differentiation. You know, we have to. We're out there pitching for business. We're out there forming relationships every day. There are a lot of, one of the criticisms of it, of our industry is actually you all offer the same thing. You know, they're not differentiating enough, or we can't see how you add value more than one of your competitors. So despite what you say, and whilst we would admit we're not as nimble as a startup, and we're there, if we're not there to disrupt the market, we're there to disrupt ourselves. We are engaging with technology, with new ways of working, so that we remain relevant. We don't manufacture anything. We don't dig anything out of the ground. We're advisors, and so we absolutely have to remain relevant. And we talk a lot about agility. We talk a lot about differentiation, and and I think it's very, very healthy. And I've referred to it already in actually looking at the how we do things, and unpacking it and rebuilding it on a regular basis.
But I think you hit on something that's very important. Is you are a service business. You rely on the people. You rely on the advisory aspects of what you can do, and therefore you have a certain amount of fire under your seat. Of you need to evolve. You need to be able to provide this and to keep abreast of the market. I speak to a lot of asset owners and operators who have recurring rent coming. They know how much is going to hit their account next month because they've signed 20-year leases, etc. And they're much more placid about it. They go, well, we're fine. We've locked in certain amounts of revenue. We're good. We don't need to change that quickly. We've been around for a few hundred years. Steady up with the AI talk. We might think about it in a few years. But they have an asset to rely on, that producing income and so on. And typically their cost base of people is minuscule compared to their operational cost of their assets. And so a bit of efficiency in terms of FTEs and so on doesn't really change anything. Or even efficiencies in how they operate doesn't really change much. But I find certain sectors, particularly for me, is things like property management, the agency side, those sorts of areas are really ripe for disruption, and there's a lot happening in those sectors.
I think you're right. I mean, to respond to your comment, I think in some senses, what you say is absolutely true. But I think you only have to, in the space of one career, the increased operationalization of real estate has been enormous. You don't tend to find too many asset owners talking about landlord and tenant. It's about customers and stakeholders and those sorts of things, and that's a change, and it's a good change because rather than it being an adversarial relationship, there's much more of a symbiotic customer focus, and customers demand.
And used to be the case once you've signed the lease, that was it. I'll talk to you in 20 years.
Exactly, and that's very different now. And there's also a lot of despite the fact they're not building any more land, the famous Mark Twain quote, the changes in technology, AI and data and everything are impacting, real estate technology massively, whether that's, building management systems, whether it's construction techniques, whether it's the rates of obsolescence and regulation as a result of all the ESG and climate focus. So I think those days of sitting back and collecting the rent and being a passive real estate owner are relative. It's not as prevalent. That you need to be more actively engaged.
Yeah. How does the UK fare compared to your other markets in terms of adoption of AI data?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I sit within a global organisation, and there's a lot of consistency in the issues that we face. There are, as I mentioned earlier, there are differences in availability of data and information within different markets, but in general terms, there's a lot of similarities. And I think so. I think a lot of the things we're wrestling with here, my colleagues in continental Europe or Asia Pac or the US are wrestling with the same things.
What are the biggest blockers that remain to really drive adoption?
Yeah, look, I think, and again, this is a personal view, I think there's a real human resistance to change. I think generally people feel quite uncomfortable with change. And the idea, one has to, we talk about, in our world, it's the change management piece is almost more important than implementation of the new systems or the new. It's how you manage the change and get people to move away from where they feel terribly comfortable. And valuers especially. I'm generalising beyond belief, and forgive me, but people take comfort in the numbers. And so they like to so engaging with new tools and stuff, you have to really convince people.
This was I'd say it's a very expensive lesson that we learn at Artefact, because we tend to build very bespoke AI tools. We go to an exec, he says, this is what's keeping me up at night, this is what I want to do. We go where we have very smart data scientists and engineers and so on. We give them the question, they go in the basement, they build it up, they come back out, and we go back to the exec saying, there you go, there's your shiny tool. And then we tend to walk away. And then the exec calls us back in 6 months saying, well, no one's using it. And the bit that we failed to do initially, which we're now much better at, is the change management piece. You have the shiny tool, but that's only part of the answer. And so it's about champions, it's about challenges, it's about demonstrating it improves your ways of working. We're not firing anyone on the back of it, all those sorts of things.
Exactly.
But it's also interesting. So we worked recently with a very large student housing provider. And they came to us and says, well, we have two problems. The first one is our students tend to book their rooms very close to September, which doesn't give us predictability over revenue. And then we have a panic for the last 2 weeks because we have X amount of void and so on. And two, we have enormous amounts of complaints in the first week because people booked a deluxe premium room, but it's in the basement without a window. But the deluxe premium room is based on the square footage rather than the floor or anything of the sort. So we want a bit more granularity. So very quickly went away, we built a reinforcement learning engine that priced the room similar to an airplane seat.
Yes.
Depending on how often you go to the website, how far back from September you are. And each room was individually priced of how far it's from the lift, the orientation, the floor, all those sorts of things that you will expect, which is fairly easy to do in a student housing building because they're all reasonably similar. It had ensuite, it didn't have ensuite, it was a premium, etc. And the more the rooms sold out, the more the price of the remaining rooms will go up. Standard model used in many, many industries. We piloted it on 2 buildings in London. We achieved the 2 asks, which is students booked the rooms sooner, and there were far fewer complaints when they got there because they picked an exact room, not a type of room. But the execs were very wary of it because they said, we're not sure we're comfortable with a reinforcement learning engine setting the price. We like setting the price, we do it every year. I don't like this thing telling me that this room is going for £700 while this one's going for £820. And so they killed the project.
Interesting.
And I was fascinated by this because I thought we missed a trick, clearly, in the change management piece. Because in my mind, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. And we as consumers have adopted it everywhere else. But we have a similar problem with build to rent, where execs are nervous about putting in reinforcement learning engine that makes pricing decisions. I don't know if you saw recently, but there was a restaurant chain in the US that was going to put dynamic pricing on their menu. And they've given up because there was such a massive backlash.
Yes.
And so they said, well, when it's quiet during the afternoon, prices will go down. At rush hour, prices will go up. There was a massive backlash around that. And so they had to can all of their plans. So it's interesting because there's still a lot of consumer resistance to change. It's not just the execs. But so in closing, if I may ask, what are the, if you look at your crystal ball and you think back so 5-10 years in the future, what do you think will change in terms of using AI and adoption, machine learning, use of data?
Yeah, so I think we will be doing more analysis of the markets. I hope we will have some sort of predictive indicators as well. I think we will, a lot of our time will be focused on investment advice and the performance of the particular asset and its place in the market. I think, and I think our market analysis will be more sophisticated. A lot of sort of market analysis at the moment is on average performance, and I think markets are much more sophisticated than that. I think if you were to look across the floor of valuation in 10 years' time at CBRE, I think you would find probably more analysts and a lot more time spent on advice to the clients, on value-add advice,
face-to-face,
rather than report preparation and
will this change the leases and the form and the structure? Because we're already seeing shorter leases and so on.
So I think it'll impact all elements of our industry because it'll impact human behaviour, and at the end of the day, your markets are driven by human behaviour, and what we do as valuers is reflect human behaviour. So if investors are using different tools, if the other advisors are using different tools, that'll be how it works.
Well, Nick, thank you so much.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure.
And thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
Pleasure to
Thank you very much.
Chat.